I'm just kind of, oh, I didn't say that well. Hi there. This is kind of out of the blue. I actually finished editing and posting my last video a couple days ahead of schedule. So that gave me some extra time to just kind of do something for fun. And that's this. I want to point out that after my last video, a lot of you commented that you don't want me to feel pressured to post more than I'm capable of. Or post more often than I'm comfortable with. Essentially, you guys were telling me not to be so hard on myself, thinking that I have to post 2 videos a week. And I so appreciate that. You guys are really kind to even think of those things and be considerate in that way. But really, I don't want you guys to worry. I happen to be a very type A regimented person. I really love kind of scheduling the things that I have to do and the things that I want to do. I am so in love with YouTube and now creating my own videos for YouTube. So when I say that I want to create a posting schedule that allows me to post 2 videos a week, that's because I want to make sure that I'm making time to do the things that I love to do, which is kind of a perfect segue into what I wanted to talk about today. This is a super quick reminder to like and subscribe if that's something you want to do. If that's not something you want to do, I'm sorry for the interruption. I'll shut up and start talking now. I posted online to ask me your questions that you might want advice or some sort of opinion on. And of course, I'm no expert of any sort. Like I said, I am just a 34-year-old woman living her life, who happens to believe that she is smart and sensible enough to give opinions that somebody might benefit from. I don't know. I happen to be very opinionated and I happen to love giving advice. And instead of giving unsolicited advice and opinions to people in my life, I decided to create this channel so that I could come here and just kind of put it all out there, express all of it, and then, you know, of course, whoever wants to take a look at these videos and pay attention to me can, and those who don't can totally ignore me, and that's fine. So yeah, I asked you guys online to send me your questions or topics that you'd like my opinion on, so I figured I would go through, I can't answer all of them at once because there's too much and the topics range and can be pretty heavy, but I wanted to pick out a few and just without notes, kind of just off the cuff, give you guys my answers, my thoughts, all that. So going back to scheduling my days and weeks, one of you asked me how I go about finding work-life balance. I think I pretty much answered this in the intro to this video, and I feel like this has to be different for everyone. For me, I find balance and I make time for everything that I need to do and everything that I want to do by scheduling these things. I schedule fun. It's very underrated. I recommend it. A few things that I always make time for, I do my best to get a full night's sleep every night. I don't have children, so I really only have to look out for myself and my 2 cats. So that does make things easier. And I have a job that values work-life balance. I think a combination of those few things does create kind of a space where I have the time and energy to do the things I need to do as well as the things I want to do. And by sticking to some sort of schedule, lists, things like that, I'm able to make sure that I've taken care of everything that I want to take care of, and then in my free time, I get to do whatever it is I want. Now, I wish there were more free time. I think most of us do, but it's how I'm able to post these videos on top of having a full-time job. So far it's working. Someone else asked, what's your advice on getting over someone you've liked for over 5 years? That's tricky because there could be a number of things going on that would kind of create a situation like this. But without any other context, I would probably advise somebody to take some time to step back and focus on self-love. I don't think that there's a way to answer this question that doesn't sound cheesy or canned or obvious, but maybe somebody could benefit from hearing it. So yeah, self-love. The way I see it is this. When I think of times in my life when my love for myself was at an all-time low, those were times that I was more willing to not only let people treat me like crap, but to hang on to feelings and opinions of people that were much higher than the feelings and opinions they had for me. And that can apply to friendships, that can apply to dating, professional relationships. But it all comes back to kind of this concept that I read about in a book. I don't remember which book it was. I think it may be a Russell Brand book. If I find out, I'll let you guys know, but I would have to go digging through a book I read years ago to find it. Anyway, and here's the way I look at it. If I don't think I'm worth much, and you treat me like I'm not worth much, that seems pretty fair. However, if I see all this value in myself, and you don't happen to see that, respect that, what have you, then either that's on you, or we're just not a match. There is no way to make everyone in this world like me. It's just not possible. But I like myself, and the people I care about like me. So if somebody comes along and we just happen to not click in that way, I chalk it up to a lack of compatibility. Again, this is applicable to any sort of interpersonal relationship. And I keep moving. When it comes to dating and friendships, I don't want to be around somebody that doesn't want to be around me. I don't want to date somebody who doesn't want to date me. That reciprocity is such a huge element of any relationship. And if you're still hanging on to the concept of this person or the relationship that could be, I would say that you're probably not being good enough to yourself. So if I were in that situation, I would probably take some time to focus on myself, pamper myself, indulge in my creative aspirations, and spending time with the people who love and like me. And then, of course, there's always therapy. I'm a huge advocate for therapy. I do believe when we have a healthy sense of self and self-love, that we do seek out those reciprocal relationships and value them. So if you're hanging on to the concept of somebody that you've liked for over 5 years now, I would venture to say that's probably never going to pan out to be what you originally wanted it to be. And I hope that you come to terms with that being okay. Because there's somebody out there, and I'm sure all of you have heard this so many times, but I'm sure there's somebody out there, multiple somebodies out there, who you would click with in that way and who would reciprocate those feelings. And you have to believe that you deserve that. Again, it sounds cliche, but sometimes these things are just cliche for a reason. Someone else asked, have you ever dealt with self-esteem or body image issues? I know that it's super common, especially in women, and as a new mom, I'm struggling with image issues. This one is so tricky, and not one that I even feel entirely equipped to answer. Because this is a very common thing. And it can happen to anyone, but I agree that it's especially difficult for young women. We are living in a society that still puts certain pressures on us to look a certain way. I do care about these things myself, and I haven't perfected the art of not stressing about what I look like. But when I catch myself kind of spinning out, thinking too much about my appearance and tying my self-worth to that, I take a step back, and there are two things that I think of. One of those things is a song lyric from Regina Spektor. I'm not gonna sing it because of not only copyright issues, but I am not gonna embarrass myself like that. But she says, I've got a perfect body and sometimes I forget. I've got a perfect body because my eyelashes catch my sweat. And I just think that lyric is brilliant. Sometimes I need to take a step back and say, hey, you may not like everything about your body, but it's doing its job. And that's something I need to be grateful for. Not only that it's doing its job, but that the human body is such a sophisticated and complex thing that is constantly doing so many things to make sure that we're okay. So I think if I am so intricately designed that I have lashes on my eyes that are there to catch sweat, debris, etc., then why am I stressing over a couple of extra pounds around my midsection? We're meant to take care of our bodies, not to hate ourselves for them. And the other thing too that is just as important, if not more so, when I do catch myself stressing over my body, my appearance, what have you, I stop and think, how much am I reducing myself to? when I think this way. Think of all the things you have going on, all the awesome things about yourself, and think about how unfair it is to those parts of you to pay them no mind because all you can think about is your appearance, which is probably the least important of all these things. If I agonize over what I look like and that not being my idea of perfection, then I am undermining my intelligence, my kindness, my creativity, and all the other things that I love about myself. So that one, of course, does come back to self-love, but it is something that I've placed kind of hard tactics around managing for myself, and those would be a couple of them. And also, the older I get, the more I just want to focus on being healthy. That I know is cliche, but stuff goes wrong, people we love get sick, we may have scares in our own lives. So at the end of the day, if you're a healthy person, I think that's something to be very grateful for. And I would focus on the other things about you that you love about yourself and that other people love too, because other people might see things that you don't. And remember, I have to tell myself this all the time. The flaws I see in the mirror are not what other people see when they look at me. When I'm hating on myself, when I look in the mirror, I think, okay, what you see right now is not what other people see when they look at you. Keep that in mind. My eyes will zero in on the parts of me that I like the least. And I think a lot of us can relate to that. Whereas when other people see me, they see me for my entirety. So even if we're going to keep this superficial, if I agonize over my midsection, for example, then I'm not paying any attention to my eyes, my lips, me as a whole, which is something I do love. So I don't know. Those are just a few of my tips. But like I said, not something I've perfected, always a work in progress, as I think it is for a lot of us. And I know that we're living in an age that is starting to value body positivity more and more, and I hope that that continues and that people start to find kind of that self-love and acceptance within themselves. So that's my take on that. Someone said they wanted to know my thoughts on loving yourself when you aren't at your goal in life. And wow, did that hit home. I stress out about this a lot. Oftentimes I'll feel like I'm not where I want to be in life. I think social media makes this worse for us because we tend to see, and I don't think this is necessarily a bad thing, but we tend to see the highlights of other people's lives. And I don't know about you, but when I'm on social media, I tend to think that everybody's got it together so much more than I do. But then when I talk to my friends, I find that they think I have it together. So really the biggest thing that helps me to keep my head screwed on straight is remembering that we're all just trying to get it together. I think if you're not at your goal in life, whatever that goal is, scrap it, come up with a new goal. I like to set attainable goals that aren't super long term and then come up with very implementable things to reach those goals. And then that comes back to holding myself to those schedules and lists that I create to kind of keep my life in balance. But yeah, I mean, whose life goes according to whatever plan they had at any point? Not anybody I know. I think we're all just trying to make it. I think we're all faking it to some degree to make it. And at least knowing that, for me, helps to ease the pressure because I know I'm not the only one. And I would venture to say that most of you watching this probably identify with that to some extent. And then the last question I wanted to get to, I really liked this one. Someone asked, do you have any advice on having good arguments and discussions? I have a really hard time explaining myself and end up getting flustered just because I can't find the right words. And this is something that I've always valued and worked on. I'm really big on communication, being a good communicator, encouraging good communication with people in my life, and allowing that to be the essential foundation to any kind of relationship. So I've been working on it forever, but here recently in the past, let's say 6 months or so, I really kind of started to shift gears and think about things in a different way to kind of create more harmony in my relationships. So I would say step one in my new approach, I started taking time to write down the things that I love about the people I love, making a list of literally everything I could think of. Pick a person and I would write down everything about them that I like and love. I read somewhere that when you practice gratitude, it sort of begets acceptance. That was kind of my rewording of it, but the more grateful you are for somebody, the less time you have to be stressed about things you don't like about them. which turned out to be so true for me. Once I started looking at people for everything they are, kind of taking a step back and looking at a person as a whole, I stopped nitpicking as much. For one, I'm not saying that's what you're doing. This is just my experience. So I found it easier to accept other people. I found it easier to accept myself and the imperfections I have and the things that I'm hard on myself for, and recognize that those things are still there, but I won't let them take over my entire perception of myself. And similarly, if I look at somebody I love for who they are entirely, including all the reasons I love them, I have less time to focus on their flaws. So that was step one. Step two was learning how to bring up issues in a way that is digestible. I used to be the kind of person that in some relationships, namely my friendships, I would let little things pile on and bother me and bother me and bother me. Just one thing on top of another on top of another. And maybe none of those things felt big or important enough to bring up in the moment. So I kind of just let it sit until I got to the point where I just did not feel any harmony in these friendships. And so then I try to hash it all out at once. And I'm grateful that I have the kind of friends that will still stick with me no matter when I decide to unload my concerns or how much there is. But we have to consider how much we can really take on in terms of criticism from those we love. And it's really, we got to take things one issue at a time. So with that in mind, I try to make it a point to take a beat before bringing something up. I'm not super confrontational in that I pick a fight with people over any little thing that bothers me. I will take a moment to decide how important this is to me, kind of comparing it to step one. Is this something that still sticks out even when I think about all the things I love about this person? If it is, if it's something that I legitimately need to get off my chest or work out, then I'll bring it up. But I do my best to only bring up one thing at a time, because that's really kind of all we can handle at a time. So step two would be one thing at a time. And step three is learning when to walk away. I'm going to talk about brain stuff. I am not a medical professional. Don't come at me for talking about brain stuff. But this is stuff that I read about a lot. This is stuff I talk about in therapy, and it's really helped me. And one concept I've talked a lot about in therapy is what some people refer to as limbic mode, when you're operating on your limbic system, which is the part of your brain that is in charge of your fight, flight, or freeze responses. We've all been in situations where we started a discussion with someone that turned into a fight. I have to be in tune with myself enough to know when I've reached the point where the way I say it, I've gone limbic. And I recognize it in myself because I will get either very anxious, angry. Essentially, I feel like I have all this canned energy and not good energy that I need to get out. However, if I let all of that out on the person I'm trying to help see something in a different way, there is just no way. There is just no way that they're going to get the message that I want to get across. Now, that's assuming that when I go limbic, the other person is also going limbic, which is usually the case. When you get to a point where I don't know if I'm articulating this well, I apologize, but this is important to me. If a discussion has elevated into an argument, it is just really important to know that at that point, you are pitted against the other person. And our brains are wired in such a way that when we're in this mode, our brains and our bodies don't know the difference between an argument and fighting for our lives in, say, a bear attack. There is no way that I can shout enough or beg enough that a bear would change its mind about attacking me, right? The same goes for people. If we're in fight mode, there's no changing anybody's mind to be on the same page. So it's pointless. That's the way I start to see it. It's just pointless. If I feel myself get to that space, as much as I want to continue and get my points across, I have to stop. I have to stop and I have to step away until I've calmed down as well as the other party. And I used to hate that. I used to hate when people asked for time to cool off, because the way I used to see it when I was younger was, there's an issue, I want to squash it now. But the more I learn about brain chemistry, the more I realize that there are states we can be in that are receptive to what other people have to say to change our minds about anything. And there are states that we can be in where it's like we're fighting for our lives and nobody's going to change our mind on a certain topic. It's just not possible. Keeping that in mind helps me. There are times when whatever I want is just not possible. That if I take a beat, return to normal, try again, my chances of success are that much higher. And that's a super important thing to keep in mind. Step 4, I would say, is learning how to communicate, meaning the words that you put out. And that's not something I can really package in a short video because that is a skill that takes a lot of time to learn. But I will say that in finding the right words, I have to make sure that I'm employing a lot of compassion as well as humility, and only speaking in terms of how something makes me feel. I don't try to make absolute statements about people, their intentions, their wants, how they are. I might say something like, I don't feel like you're happy for me while I'm celebrating X thing happening in my life. Or, hey, I feel like you're kind of bringing me down. But those statements I always follow up with something like, but I could be wrong. It could be in my head. Because 99.9% of the time, there is a possibility that I'm wrong. And that's where humility comes into play. When I recognize that vocally in front of another person, then whatever issue I'm bringing up, I'm allowing them the opportunity to say, this is not what I intended. This is in your head. And I think that does ease the pressure off of people when they recognize that you're open to the idea that this may be a you issue. And I think in those situations, it's a lot easier for both parties to recognize where they could be wrong about just about anything. And it's important too to have enough compassion for the other person to stop and think, how would I receive this? How would I want somebody to bring this up to me? Still keeping in mind that just because something works for you doesn't mean it works for everyone, but just trying to be considerate of how tough it is for anyone to hear any sort of criticism at all. Criticism is important for us to hear. It is essential to our growth. It is a running theme in these videos that I post, but we've got to make sure that we're setting up these criticisms in such a way that they can be received and they can help people grow or understand you or whatever the goal is. Now, of course, when I talk about all of this like communication stuff, I'm really thinking in the scope of normal, everyday, for the most part, healthy relationships. If what you're dealing with is destructive or dysfunctional, that's not something that I'm qualified to really speak on. But in dealing with kind of your day-to-day relationships where both parties have a certain amount of respect for each other, those 4-ish things really have helped me, like I said, create a sense of harmony in my relationships. And I'd really be curious to hear anybody else's tips or tactics or what you think of mine. But that's what I've got. It's a work in progress always. I may think in entirely different terms 5 years from now, but for now, I think it's working for me. Yeah. I don't want to jinx myself, but I am at a place, at least right now, where I feel like my relationships are smooth sailing for the most part. And it won't always be that way, but I do think compassion and humility really can take anybody very, very far in their relationship. So I do think that that's something we should all keep in mind as values in relationships. But again, that's just me. Curious to know what you guys think. I'm curious to know what else you'd like to hear my thoughts on. Or if you think that I'm just a total charlatan and I have no right to be speaking on these things whatsoever. So yeah, feel free to let me know in the comments. Feel free to ask me your questions. I did say in my post, my original post asking for questions, that if you want to remain anonymous, as a lot of these questions were posted publicly, feel free to DM me on Instagram. I didn't say anyone's names in this video, but my question and those answers are public, so I understand if people are not entirely comfortable with posing questions in such a public way. And I look forward to hearing your questions and getting to do this again, hopefully. And I'm sure we're going to have some very, very hearty discussions now. So with that, before I get to that, I wanted to shout out you, the one person who's watching this who's not me. Thank you. Thank you for watching. And I hope you'll join me in the comments to continue this discussion. All right. See you guys there.